The morning had started just like any other, quiet, routine, with the soft chirp of birds outside and the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Dr. Ben, the local vet, was sipping his coffee when a sudden scratching at his door caught his attention. It was an unfamiliar sound, different from the usual requests for help from local pet owners. Curiosity piqued. Dr. Ben set his cup down and went to answer the door. As the door swung open, a lone stray dog stood before him, looking up at him with weary eyes. It was unlike any dog he'd seen before. Its coat was a patchwork of dust and dirt, its fur matted in places, as if it had been wandering the streets for a long time. The dog had a rugged, untamed look about it, but what really caught Ben's attention was the peculiar glint in its eyes, an intelligence that didn't seem to match its scruffy appearance. Before Dr. Ben could react, the dog took a cautious step forward, lowered its head, and dropped something small and shiny at his feet. Then, without a sound, the dog turned and trotted off down the street, disappearing into the morning mist as quickly as it had arrived. Confused and intrigued, Ben looked down at the object now resting on the doorstep. At first glance, it appeared to be a small trinket, a simple piece of jewelry perhaps. But as he bent down to pick it up, he realized it was much more than that. It was an amulet, old and worn, its surface covered in strange, intricate symbols that seemed to shimmer with an eerie light. The metal had a weight to it, as though it held a secret, and as his fingers brushed the surface, he felt an almost electric pulse of energy radiating from it. The amulet seemed to hum in his hand, as if alive, as if it recognized him. The strange symbols were like nothing he had ever seen before, and the air around him seemed to grow heavy, charged with an invisible force. Dr. Ben's heart raced. This was no ordinary trinket. He had never encountered anything like it in all his years as a veterinarian, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this item had been meant for him, or that it had found its way to him for a reason. Suddenly, a thought struck him. Could this have anything to do with the mysterious dog that had left it at his doorstep? What did it all mean? And what had drawn the dog, with its wild eyes and odd behavior, to him? As Dr. Ben turned the amulet over in his hands, he felt the weight of the mystery growing deeper, and he knew that this day, this simple, ordinary morning, was about to become anything but. Dr. Ben couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the amulet than met the eye. Its presence weighed heavily on him as he carefully placed it on the desk in his clinic, the faint glow of the strange symbols casting eerie shadows across the room. His instincts told him this wasn't just a curious artifact. It was something far more significant. But where to begin? After hours of staring at the symbols, searching through his veterinary textbooks, and running a few online searches, Ben came to the conclusion that his knowledge was far too limited to make any headway. The symbols were unlike anything he had ever seen before, a mix of ancient languages and symbols that seemed to defy explanation. His mind raced as he thought of only one person who could help him unravel the mystery. Alex, an old friend and a history professor at the local university, was the first person Ben reached out to. The two had been close for years, sharing a bond that went beyond just their academic interests. Alex had always had a knack for deciphering ancient texts and unraveling historical enigmas. If anyone could help, it was him. Ben made the call, and after a brief conversation, Alex agreed to meet at the clinic later that day. When Alex arrived, he was immediately taken by the strange object sitting on Ben's desk. "What have you got here, Ben?" he asked, his brow furrowing as he leaned in to get a closer look. As he studied the amulet, his face shifted from curiosity to something more serious. "This is unusual," Alex muttered, his fingers grazing over the symbols. "These markings? I've seen something similar in my research, but never in this exact form." Ben could see the unease in his friend's eyes. "What do you mean? What is it?" Alex hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "This could be tied to something much darker than either of us are prepared for." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Ben. "I'm not sure if it's just a coincidence, but these symbols, they have been linked to an ancient curse in several old texts I've studied. Curses designed to protect something or someone from prying eyes. There are rumors that whoever comes in contact with this type of object, well, strange things start to happen, Ben was skeptical at first. He had always been grounded in the sciences, and the idea of curses seemed far-fetched. But as he saw the look in Alex's eyes, he could tell that his friend wasn't one to make baseless claims. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier, the air almost thick with tension. Curses? Ben repeated, his voice tinged with disbelief. Come on, Alex. We're talking about a metal trinket here, not some magical artifact. Alex's gaze never wavered. I get it. It sounds crazy. But I've studied enough ancient myths and folklore to know that there's often a kernel of truth in them. The stories, the legends, they're not always as far-fetched as we think. With that, the two of them turned their attention back to the amulet, examining it more closely. The symbol seemed to move slightly under their gaze, as though they were alive, shifting in subtle patterns. Suddenly, a chill ran down Ben's spine as he felt the temperature in the room drop. That's odd, Alex muttered, his voice tight. I didn't expect that. Ben looked up, his eyes wide. What do you mean? As Alex leaned in closer, his hand hovering just inches from the amulet, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. Both men jumped, startled by the unexpected noise. The air in the clinic had turned heavy, almost suffocating, and the temperature had continued to drop. Ben felt a cold shiver run down his spine. What was that? Ben whispered, his heart pounding in his chest. Alex was silent for a moment, then spoke quietly. We need to be careful. Whatever this object is, it's not ordinary. I've read of artifacts like this one causing disturbances, but this feels different. I think the curse isn't just a myth. It's real. Ben and Alex exchanged uneasy glances, both sensing that something far more dangerous was at play. The amulet, which had seemed like an oddity at first, was quickly revealing itself to be far more than either of them had bargained for. And as they continued their examination, it became clear. Whatever power the amulet contained was beginning to stir. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. The clinic's old wooden floor groaned, as if protesting the presence of the object in the room. A low, rumbling growl echoed from the hallway, followed by the sound of claws scraping against the floor. Ben's heart raced. Whatever had been unleashed had already begun to make its presence known. They were no longer dealing with an artifact. They were dealing with something much darker, something that had been waiting for the right moment to be awakened. And that moment had arrived. As the days passed, Ben and Alex's investigation into the amulet deepened, and their growing sense of unease only intensified. They had scoured every available resource, piecing together fragments of information from old texts, but nothing seemed to connect the amulet to its true purpose. That is, until Ben remembered something, an old journal his grandfather had kept in the attic of the clinic. Ben's grandfather had been a well-known figure in the town, having run the clinic for years before Ben took over. While he had always been a practical man, Ben had heard vague stories about his grandfather's mysterious past, rumors of hidden knowledge, secret discoveries, and long-forgotten relics. Perhaps Ben thought the journal might hold a clue. One evening, with the sun beginning to set and the clinic eerily quiet, Ben climbed into the dusty attic. The smell of aged wood and old leather filled the air as he sifted through piles of boxes and forgotten memories. His hand finally landed on an old, worn leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and fragile with age. The journal looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. With a mix of curiosity and dread, Ben opened it to the first page, where his grandfather's neat handwriting began to unravel a story that sent a chill down his spine. The journal spoke of a hidden treasure, one tied to an ancient and powerful force. According to the notes, the treasure was not just material wealth. It was something far more valuable, something capable of granting unimaginable power. The amulet was described as the key to unlocking the treasure, a piece of a larger puzzle that had been protected for centuries by a dark and mysterious force. The treasure itself was said to be hidden in a place few could reach, and those who dared to seek it would face deadly challenges designed to test their courage, wits, and resolve. As Ben continued to read, the journal's tone grew more urgent. His grandfather spoke of strange occurrences that had plagued the clinic in the years leading up to his death. Unexplainable phenomena, disturbances in the night, and the feeling of an ancient presence lurking just beyond the veil of reality. He warned Ben to never seek the treasure, to never pursue the mystery of the amulet, for fear of unleashing something far darker than anyone could control. The final pages of the journal were incomplete, the writing cut off abruptly, as if the author had been interrupted, or worse, silenced. Ben's heart raced as he slammed the journal shut. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the more he learned, the more he realized how little he truly understood about the force they were dealing with. He raced downstairs to find Alex, eager to share the discovery. But as he descended into the clinic's main room, the atmosphere had shifted. The air felt colder, the walls seemed to press in, and a low hum buzzed in the background, like a distant voice whispering just beyond his hearing. Alex was sitting at the desk, flipping through an ancient tome with a tense expression on his face. "Alex," Ben called out, his voice trembling. "You need to see this." Alex looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and intrigue. "What is it, Ben?" Before Ben could respond, the clinic's lights flickered and then went out entirely, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment, there was only the sound of their breathing, the silence pressing in around them. Then, from the far corner of the room, a soft, rustling noise began. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but quickly grew louder, footsteps dragging along the floor. Ben's pulse quickened. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. Alex stood, his hand instinctively reaching for the nearby flashlight. As the beam of light flickered to life, the room seemed to shift. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, twisting in strange, impossible shapes. The temperature had dropped even further, and the air felt thick, like they were breathing something that wasn't quite air. A low, menacing growl rumbled from the corner. Ben's heart pounded in his chest as he slowly turned toward the sound. A figure emerged from the shadows. At first, it was nothing more than a dark shape, but as it stepped closer, its form became clearer. It was the stray dog, the one that had brought the amulet to Ben's doorstep. But something was wrong. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural, malevolent light, and its fur bristled as though charged with static. Its teeth were bared in a snarl that seemed too human, too knowing. Alex gasped. What is happening?" The dog took another step forward, its gaze locked on Ben. As it drew closer, the air seemed to thicken with an almost palpable energy, and a faint humming sound reverberated through the room, like the hum of the amulet itself. Ben felt his knees weaken as the realization hit him. The amulet wasn't just a relic, it wasn't just a key. It was a beacon, calling something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The growling grew louder, and suddenly, the clinic was filled with an eerie, almost oppressive silence. Ben and Alex stood frozen, staring at the dog, no, at whatever it had become, when a voice, low and guttural, echoed in the darkness. "You have come for the treasure," the voice whispered, but it wasn't the dog speaking. The voice seemed to come from within the very walls of the clinic itself, a deep, ancient force speaking through the amulet's power. But the treasure demands a price. As the shadows in the room seemed to draw closer, Ben felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The truth was undeniable now. They weren't just dealing with an artifact. They were facing an ancient, malevolent force that had been waiting for centuries to be unleashed. And they were now caught in its web. The days following their unsettling discovery had left Ben and Alex on edge, unable to escape the eerie presence that had begun to haunt the clinic. The events were escalating too quickly, and they both knew they had no choice but to pursue the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. The clues from Ben's grandfather's journal were their only lead, and they had a sinking feeling that their quest for answers would only take them deeper into the darkness. The journal's last entry mentioned a place, an old crypt buried deep within a dense forest on the outskirts of town. It was an isolated, forgotten spot, hidden from the eyes of the townsfolk and kept secret for centuries. The journal hinted that the treasure, the key to unlocking the power of the amulet, lay within this crypt. But it also warned of the dangers they would face, tests of character, of will, and of strength. The treasure was not meant to be easily claimed, and those who sought it would find themselves tested by forces far beyond their understanding. With little more than the journal and their own determination, Ben and Alex decided to follow the path laid out for them. They packed supplies, gathered their courage, and set out early the next morning, the weight of the amulet heavy in Ben's pocket. As they drove through the winding roads toward the forest, a thick fog began to settle in, obscuring their view and lending an eerie atmosphere to the landscape. The trees grew denser as they ventured deeper into the woods, their branches twisting and reaching out like gnarled fingers, their leaves whispering secrets on the wind. The further they went, the more oppressive the air became. It felt as though the forest itself was alive, watching them, reacting to their presence. Every step they took seemed to disturb the silence, each crack of a twig underfoot reverberating like a warning. Ben couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was following them. It was as though the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to unfold. At long last, after hours of navigating the tangled undergrowth and ancient trees, they came upon a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone structure, partially overgrown with vines and moss, its entrance marked by a crumbling archway. The crypt. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. But as they approached, Ben's heart began to race. The air around the crypt seemed charged with an otherworldly energy, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. There was something inherently wrong about this place. They stepped closer, their footsteps tentative but determined. The moment they crossed the threshold of the crypt, the temperature dropped sharply, and a low, guttural growl echoed from within the darkness. Ben and Alex froze. There, standing at the far end of the crypt, was the dog, the same stray that had led them to this place, its eyes glowing with an unsettling, otherworldly light. It didn't move, but its presence was undeniable. Alex whispered, "It's the same one. But what is it doing here?" Ben's thoughts were racing. This dog had appeared at the clinic, in the forest, and now in the crypt. It seemed to be everywhere, lurking in the shadows, watching them. There was no doubt in his mind now. This dog was more than just a stray. It was a guardian, an ancient protector tied to the amulet, its purpose to test those who sought the treasure. "We need to keep going," Ben said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's guarding something, and we've come too far to turn back now." They ventured deeper into the crypt, the flickering light of their torches casting long shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of age and decay, and the silence was stifling, broken only by the occasional sound of their footsteps and the soft growl of the dog behind them. As they explored, they found symbols etched into the stone, identical to the ones on the amulet. The same strange markings, glowing faintly as though they were alive. They were drawn in patterns across the walls, the floor, and the ceiling, as if telling a story, guiding them toward their goal. In the center of the crypt, a stone pedestal stood, its surface smooth and worn by the passage of time. Upon it lay a small, intricately carved box. The treasure. Ben felt a surge of anticipation as he stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He could sense the power emanating from the box, a force that seemed to pulse in time with his own heartbeat. It was a magnetic pull, drawing him closer, urging him to open it. But as his hand reached for the box, the dog let out a low, menacing growl. Alex looked at Ben, his voice trembling. "Ben, are we sure we want to do this?" The journal said, "The treasure comes with a price." Ben paused, his hand hovering just above the box. The dog's gaze was fixed on him, unblinking, as though it were waiting for him to make a decision. For the first time, Ben felt a surge of doubt, a whisper of fear. The dog wasn't just guarding the crypt, it was testing them, making sure they were worthy of whatever lay inside. "We don't have a choice," Ben said, his voice steady despite the unease creeping up his spine. "The treasure holds the answers we need. It's the only way to understand what's happening to us." With that, he lifted the box from the pedestal. The moment his fingers touched it, the air in the crypt seemed to shift, and the growling of the dog grew louder. The shadows around them twisted and writhed, as if they were alive, responding to the box. A strange energy filled the room, and Ben felt the amulet in his pocket pulse in response, its glow growing brighter. Suddenly, the dog sprang forward, blocking their path. It bared its teeth, its eyes now glowing with an intense, almost blinding light. Ben could feel its power, its purpose. It was there to protect the treasure, to test their resolve, and to determine whether they were worthy of the knowledge and power contained within the box. Ben took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "We've come this far. We're not turning back now." As he took the final step toward the dog, it hesitated for a moment, its glowing eyes locking with his. In that moment, Ben understood. The dog wasn't just a guardian. It was a sentient being, a force of nature tied to the very essence of the treasure. It had been watching them, testing their courage, their determination, and their willingness to face the darkness that lay ahead. The dog stepped aside, its growl fading into silence. Ben could feel the weight of its gaze upon him, but it no longer posed a threat. It had accepted their resolve. With the final piece of the puzzle in place, Ben opened the box. Inside, there was no gold, no jewels, only a single, ancient scroll, its edges frayed with age. As he unrolled it, the symbols on the parchment glowed with the same eerie light as the amulet, and Ben realized with a chilling clarity that the treasure was not material wealth. It was knowledge, a key to unlocking the very forces that had been at work in his life, a guide to understanding the ancient curse that had followed him, and a map to the next phase of their journey. The dog, now standing silently in the shadows, had completed its task. It had tested them, and they had passed. But as Ben and Alex stood there, gazing at the scroll, they realized that the true test was just beginning. The amulet, the crypt, the dog, all of it had been a prelude to something much larger, something far more sinister. The treasure had been unlocked, but the real mystery lay ahead. The air inside the crypt shifted once again as Ben and Alex stood before the ancient treasure. Their hearts raced with anticipation, but there was something heavier in the air now, something oppressive. It wasn't just the weight of the amulet, which still pulsed in Ben's pocket like a living thing. It was the overwhelming sense that they were about to cross a threshold from which there would be no return. With a tremor of uncertainty in his hands, Ben stepped forward, unlocking the final mechanism hidden within the stone pedestal. The moment he did, the room seemed to tremble beneath their feet, as if the very earth was awakening. The ground groaned, and the crypt's walls groaned, their ancient mortar cracking in places, revealing hidden seams of light beneath them. The air hummed, vibrating with energy, as though something vast and long forgotten had just been released. Then, with a sound like the shifting of mountains, the chamber opened. A blinding flash of light flooded the crypt, blurring everything in its path. For a moment, Ben and Alex were blinded, forced to shield their eyes from the radiance. As the light slowly receded, they dared to look. What lay before them was beyond anything they could have imagined. The treasure was not what they had expected. It wasn't piles of gold or ancient artifacts of immeasurable value. Instead, it was something far more potent, a crystal, glowing with an otherworldly light. It pulsed rhythmically, as if alive, its edges flickering with ethereal symbols similar to those etched into the amulet. The crystal sat atop a pedestal of stone, surrounded by an aura of power so intense that it seemed to distort the air itself. But that was not all. The moment they gazed upon the treasure, Ben and Alex felt the shift within themselves, a sudden heaviness in the air, the feeling of an invisible force pressing in on them from all sides. The world outside the crypt seemed to fade away, leaving only the chamber, the treasure, and the growing sense of danger. Ben felt his stomach twist. "It's beautiful but wrong," he murmured almost to himself. Alex nodded slowly, his face pale as he took in the scene. "I can feel it. The energy, it's like nothing I've ever experienced. This is powerful, too powerful." The realization struck them both simultaneously. This treasure, this crystal, was not simply a source of power. It was a key, a gateway to something far darker, something they had been unknowingly drawn to. And the price for claiming it? They both knew it wouldn't be free. The curse, Ben whispered, recalling the warnings in his grandfather's journal. The treasure had been locked away for a reason, hidden deep within the crypt for centuries. The forces bound within the crystal had been kept dormant, imprisoned by the very amulet that had brought them here. But now that the amulet had unlocked the chamber, the curse was free to wreak havoc once again. A low growl interrupted their thoughts. Ben and Alex turned as the stray dog, now standing solemnly just beyond the threshold of the crypt, stepped forward, its eyes glowing with an unearthly light. It was the same dog that had led them here, the one that had appeared time and again to guide them on this path. Its posture was regal, yet its presence was burdened, as if it, too, understood the gravity of the situation. "Do you know what this means?" Alex asked, his voice strained. "Is this your purpose? To bring us to this point?" The dog stared at them, its gaze unwavering, as if considering their question. Then, without a sound, it turned its head slightly, directing their attention back to the treasure. Ben stepped closer, his mind racing. He could feel the amulet pressing against his chest, its weight growing heavier as he neared the crystal. It was as if the two objects were connected, like they had been waiting for this moment. He reached out, but his hand faltered just before it touched the crystal. It was almost as if an invisible barrier was preventing him from getting any closer, an unseen force testing his resolve. "The treasure? Is it worth it?" Ben muttered, his voice filled with doubt. "What if we unleash something terrible, something we can't control?" Alex swallowed hard, his throat tight with fear. "Ben, the journal mentioned a price, a terrible cost. If we take the treasure, the curse will follow. It's not just the town or the world we're putting at risk. It's everything." The room seemed to darken as the gravity of their decision settled over them. The dog's growl deepened, an ominous sound that sent a shiver through Ben's spine. It was watching them closely, its eyes narrowing, as if waiting for the final choice to be made. It wasn't just a guardian. It was a judge, and its silence spoke volumes. The decision was now in their hands. "We came here seeking answers," Ben said slowly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But we might not be ready for the truth. We don't know what this curse could unleash. We might be better off leaving it all behind." Alex nodded, but a pang of regret tugged at him. He had spent so long chasing this mystery, piecing together the puzzle, that the thought of walking away now seemed impossible. The pull of the treasure was strong, irresistible. But what if we could control it? What if we could use the power for good? Ben's heart raced as the conflicting emotions inside him battled for dominance. The temptation was overwhelming, but so was the fear of what might happen if they took the crystal. The last thing they wanted was to unleash a force that could destroy everything they knew. The dog's growl turned to a low whine, almost as if it were pleading with them to understand. Then, as if sensing their indecision, it stepped forward, its movements deliberate and calm. It approached the pedestal where the crystal sat, standing between them and the treasure. It looked up at Ben, its eyes filled with a quiet wisdom. The message was clear. They were not merely facing a choice of greed or responsibility. They were being tested, forced to confront their own desires, their own motivations. The dog wasn't just protecting the treasure. It was protecting them, ensuring they understood the gravity of what they were about to do. Ben closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He thought of his life, his clinic, the small town he had sworn to protect. He thought of Alex, his oldest friend, standing beside him. And he thought of the world, of the darkness that could be unleashed if they made the wrong choice. He turned to Alex. "We have to leave it. If the curse is real, if the power of that crystal is as dangerous as it feels, we can't take that risk. Not for us, not for anyone." Alex hesitated, his gaze lingering on the treasure. The temptation still called to him, but he could see the resolve in Ben's eyes. Slowly he nodded. "You're right. It's too dangerous." Together, they stepped back from the pedestal, turning away from the treasure. The dog, watching them intently, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief. It had done its job, guiding them to this moment, testing their resolve. The decision they had made wasn't just the right one. It was the only one that could save them all. As they exited the crypt, leaving the treasure and the curse behind, the door slowly closed, sealing the chamber once again. The weight of their decision hung in the air, heavy and final. The world outside felt quieter now, the oppressive energy of the crypt slowly fading as they left it behind. But Ben and Alex knew that their journey was far from over. The curse had been sealed away for now, but the forces that had been awakened would not be silenced forever. And as they walked back into the world they thought they knew, they understood that they would always carry the burden of their choice, and the knowledge that they had narrowly escaped a fate that could have destroyed everything. The story gently reminds us that power and temptation often come with hidden risks. It shows us that the right choice is not always the easiest one to make. In life, there are moments when we must walk away from something we want, not because it's wrong, but because the consequences could harm others. It's a lesson in wisdom, urging us to pause and consider the full picture before making decisions. Sometimes, the most important choices are the ones that require restraint and self-control. The stray dog in the story acts as a guardian, guiding Ben and Alex through their journey. This represents the tests we all face in life, moments that challenge us to examine our readiness and worthiness to handle power or knowledge. The dog's silent watchfulness teaches us that, before we act, we should question whether we're prepared for the responsibility that comes with our desires. The dog's presence serves as a reminder that we are constantly being tested, whether we realize it or not. As Ben and Alex discover, the pursuit of something valuable often carries hidden dangers. Even well-intentioned actions can lead to unintended harm. The treasure they uncover seems to promise great reward, but with it comes a dark and powerful curse. This serves as a reminder that everything comes with a price, and that price is often more than we anticipate. The story asks us to think carefully about what we seek and whether the potential costs are worth the reward. It encourages mindfulness and reflection in every decision we make. Ultimately, the story teaches us that the most important decisions are not driven by immediate desires, but by the long-term consequences of our actions. It calls us to be humble, courageous, and responsible, recognizing that our choices affect not just ourselves, but everyone around us. Sometimes the wisest thing we can do is step away from temptation, letting go of what we desire in order to protect the greater good. It's a reminder that true wisdom lies in knowing when to walk away, even if it's the hardest decision to make.